What's up YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to test, do open element air filters actually increase your intake temperatures? We're getting started right now. Sorry guys, I got the truck running because we want to get it up to operating temp to make sure we're actually doing this test any justice, because obviously on a cold engine it's going to be kind of skewed as it heats up, and I'm trying to get the factory setup to be as close to this setup engine temperature wise as possible. So those of you guys that have been watching the channel know I got a ton of crap when I advocated for cold air intakes on the 6.0 Powerstroke. Wait for it today, because we're advocating for cold air intakes on the 6.7. So obviously there'll be an install video of this cheap Amazon air intake. This filter's probably garbage. We're gonna put an S&B on it at some point. But what we're gonna do, so we're gonna monitor our exhaust temps, which is kind of hard to really tell if that's gonna be a difference, but exhaust temps, air intake temperature, and we're gonna drive around. So my idea is that at highway speeds, when you're driving, that this box, one, gets heat soaked enough that it doesn't really matter whether you have an open or closed filter element, and two, that while traveling at a highway speed, you're probably getting enough airflow in to the engine that you're able to really compensate for any added heat that you might be taking in with the open element filter. I don't feel this is something that can be sufficiently taken into account on a dyno either, because I've heard people reference dyno figures and stuff that they've seen. I don't think that's really necessarily helpful. So basically I'm saying the added airflow of the aftermarket open element filter outweighs any cons of maybe higher intake temperatures or hotter air. But I also feel, again, at highway speeds, that enough air is getting pushed in there to kind of mitigate that as a whole. And I think it's something that's been grossly overestimated in the industry from people that don't like the aftermarket intakes. They are more maintenance than factory ones, guys. So again, I'm not saying that the factory, well, this is a standard, just pop it off, there's a thing in there. But on the 6 liter, you had a filter that could hold a ridiculous amount of debris in it. And a lot of people like that. It was a great filter, but it was restrictive. I swear if one person in the comments says a 6 liter should be making 500 horsepower with the factory intake or 600 with factory intake, I will literally throw my computer. Speaking of the 6 liter, it is in the shop, finally getting the engine dropped in, so stay tuned for that. Very exciting there. I'm super excited for that. So anyway, that's enough talking for me. The truck's warming up here. We're gonna close the hood. Again, the first run's going to be with the factory intake. I'm gonna look at the numbers and I'm gonna review them. I'll try to show them. It's kind of hard to show the numbers on camera with my GoPro and the monitor mounted up there, but I am going to at least take track of them and be filming so I can give myself notes while I'm driving. Again, we're gonna go on, not a crazy loop on the highway, but we'll go on a little loop on the highway, get some numbers. That's why I'm letting it get up to operating temperature now, so I don't have to deal with it then. I gotta set some parameters on my monitor to make sure I'm monitoring the stuff I want to. So we're basically looking for air intake temperature changes. I believe my truck said it's about 94 degrees out right now, so not a super cold day. Anyway guys, before we get started, if you haven't already, smash that like button, give this video a big thumbs up, drop your comments down below. Do you think that the factory intake is going to outperform as far as keeping colder intake temperatures than our aftermarket open filter element setup? So my belief is that while driving, there's going to be no significant difference, if any at all. And I would say that's still more restrictive. So that comes into play when you start talking bigger turbos and stuff on any of these vehicles. So anyway, that's enough of me talking. We're getting to work. All right, everybody, we are back. This is actually a different day, but we're back and we're going to talk about the results a little bit. We were driving. So first we did the factory setup. We tried to get the truck to operating temp, and then we took it on the highway, did about a 25-minute loop on there, and then came home, put the aftermarket one in, and then did the same loop. at the same speeds. I tested a couple different speeds, primarily around 65 miles per hour. That's typical highway speed. I tried a little less and a little more, but mainly most of my data points were from 65 miles per hour. And I will say that they both behaved very similarly as I lowered or increased speeds as far as intake temperature goes. My hypothesis was that there would be virtually no difference between one or the other. There were some differences, some surprising ones I wasn't actually anticipating. So I think it's going to be kind of cool. At least for me, I kind of like to nerd out on stuff. But what I noticed with the open element filter, and it does make sense after I stop and think about it, at idle, sitting there, we saw that the intake air temperature rose relatively quick, faster than with the closed box system. Makes sense. It's open to get the engine heat, and we're not pushing any air into it. But also what we found out is it responded much faster at dropping air temps as soon as I started moving. Even at city speeds, which was a little slow on the closed system, they would still drop, just not as rapidly as the open element filter. My assumption is because air can still get there from this front grille. There is a path. It may not be direct, but there is a path that air will get there. But because it's open, it's not restricted to a small opening that directs air into it. It can pull all the air from around it. So I think that is why it's able to drop intake temperatures faster than the factory one. It also rises faster than the factory one. So it's kind of a unique trade-off that I just found interesting. But here's the thing. When do we actually care about this performance, or when should you actually care about this performance? And that's while you're driving. So while you're actually driving down the highway, I do want to say this. It was as close as it could be from each run to the other. On the way back with the second run, we did hit some cool patches. A storm was obviously coming from behind me, and it dropped temperature about 10 degrees, and I saw that in my air intake data. I will mark that if I include that footage. I might not, just because it's not helpful, or it's not as helpful. Interesting, but not what we need. So the main run going 65 was going out before I came back. So let's talk about everything that was against the open element. Everything had a longer time to heat soak. So the engine had a longer time to actually get heat soaked. So it was hotter under there. Granted, I don't think it was a huge difference, but it was something to take into consideration. I deliberately tried to stack the deck against the open element filter because I wanted to give it the worst chance of doing well. So we already talked about how it does at idle and how it does around town, but on the highway, what I noticed is it dropped temperatures really, really well. So typically for most of it, and mind you, it was 2 degrees hotter outside during that pass. It was typically 88 to 90 degrees, primarily 88 on the closed air intake, I believe. I'll rewatch my footage because I kept a close eye on outside ambient air temperature according to the truck, along with the intake temperatures. But also for this one, so it was about 2 degrees hotter. It was mostly 92 and occasionally 90 degrees on the way out for the open element filter, and it was only 1 degree hotter. I think it's a very interesting tidbit because everybody calls them hot air intakes. But at actual highway speeds, when we're actually driving, it's actually, I'm saying actually way too much, pretty much the same temperature. It's within a degree, which is a very negligible when we're talking about everyday driving. I think the fact that we're able to push more air into the truck at only 1 degree warmer, and again, there's some variables that may have been at play that it wasn't truly a 1 degree warmer thing if the temperature stayed the same. Truthfully, to make this a permanent, like this is the facts, I'd have to do this on like 100 trucks and at least 10 times a truck. That'd give me enough data points to prove this. This is one truck, but again, I tried my best to get this as close to the other as possible so we could really try to test this pretty well. And I'm relatively happy with what I did. I was able to get ahead of a storm, so that didn't play a factor, and it wasn't until the way back that the temperature dropped, and then I saw big changes that skewed that data, but I at least had the run out where it was warmer, or at least within, again, margin of error. I really want to call this negligible for driving down the highway. As far as air temperatures go, around town, I actually believe that the open element filter performed better, because as soon as I started going, intake temps dropped pretty fast. Not that they didn't drop with the closed element filter, it just took longer because there's less air it can pull in. It's much more restrictive. Now, I do want to say this, I do feel there's drawbacks to open element filters. They require more maintenance. If you get one of the cleanable ones, you have to clean it. I recommend at least every other oil change, cleaning them. At a minimum, people typically don't do that. And for a lot of people, the factory setup is easier. Filters are cheap. You pop the top up, slam that in, and you're done. You're on your way. You have a new clean filter to go. But I do think all this has been very fascinating. I hear a lot of people, hot air intakes is something I hear, and I think I kind of disproved that, at least in this case, that I would not call a 1 degree temperature change when you're able to get so much more air to your actual engine. That's tough to beat. I'm not saying there aren't better designed intakes out there. I don't have the resources to test all of them. Banks is really the one that advocates for that hot air intake, saying it's garbage, and he's a great smack talker. He's a smart guy too, don't get me wrong, but I think some of that's advertisement. It would be very interesting. I wish I had the money to test a nicer open element setup to the bank setup to the factory one. I think that'd be very interesting data to have to kind of go through and analyze, but I just rattled off like $1,000 and stuff that is essentially the same part, and I'm not buying it all. But again, for everyone out there that has referenced and made the comment, hot air intake, they don't flow anymore, common things that are said. This is the only thing I could have done better is actually analyze mass airflow, which the Edge CTS2 didn't have a parameter for, or I would have actually monitored it. Maybe, I think the CTS3 lets you monitor more. There's other software that would let me monitor that MAF sensor a little bit better. But from everything I can tell, this is pulling in a fair amount more air, at least enough to mess it up. As far as the check engine light, someone told me that there is a Ford update that corrects it and opens up parameters and allows a little more intake flow and without tripping all of those sensors. I'm going to look into that because that's a relatively easy fix, though it might be like $100 for them to give me the update, which I'm hoping it would only be 100, which would be kind of crappy. But anyway, so in my testing, it was a 1 degree difference at highway speeds cruising. Obviously, it takes a little bit of time for things to settle down once you're on there, because if you've never monitored intake temps and what it does with your truck, sometimes it's really surprising. Like, I noticed if I went faster than, like, 65 seemed to kind of be the sweet spot. If I went faster, both closed intake and open element saw increases in intake temperature, and if I went slower, both also saw basically identical increases in intake temperature as well. So it was kind of interesting to see that. I wasn't expecting that. 65 seemed to be the sweet point. So anyway, those of you guys that have made it to the end of this, I do want to give a shout out to a sponsor again, DSD. They support the channel, 10% off if you call them. Their website, sorry, I'm having a hard time speaking. Website's in the description. That has a phone number to call. Let them know 60 Bros sent you, and you'll be eligible for 10% off items that are approved for it. Not all parts. I know S&B doesn't typically do discounts, at least for companies. They have like scheduled discounts they do occasionally. But so if it's eligible, they will let you get a 10% discount. Just let them know we sent you. Show those guys some support because they're a big support to us here on the channel, guys. So like, comment, and of course, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.